the United Party for National Development came true. On 16 August 2021, Mr. Hichilema and the UPND were declared winners of the 2021 general elections held 4 days earlier. As president-elect, Hichilema appeared to hold his first post-victory press conference at his residence, Community House. Reports had reached him indicating that some suspected UPND supporters had turned violent on members of the defeated PF. But Mr. Hichilema could not take this. He was making his intentions known 8 days before he could even be sworn in as Zambia's 7th president.
We are not about to take public office, replace those that have been very violent against our people, and only to start a new wave of violence. We're not about to be that. Absolutely not.
It is not a secret that PF cadres had made the lives of ordinary Zambians unbearable. It would be grossly unfair to allege that the emergence of political party cadres on the Zambian political scene began with the ascension to power of President Edgar Lungu in January 2015. Likewise, it would be far from the truth to ascribe the outbreak of violent cadres to the 10-year rule of the PF, which ran from September 2011 to August 2021. The subject of political party cadres taking the law in their own hands has a long history and dates back to the early years of Zambia's political independence in the 1960s. On 3rd July 1969, a Lusaka High Court judge, Ivor Evans, made a ruling which did not please the ruling United National Independence Party, UNEP. Judge Evans had quashed a judgment in which Lusaka magistrate William Bruce Lau had fined 2 uniformed Portuguese soldiers who had strayed into Zambia on the border with Angola in Chavuma district of Northwestern Province. 12 days later, about 500 UNIP youths from the Zambia Youth Service Camp in Kafue besieged the Lusaka High Court building to mete out instant justice on the judges who were mainly of European descent. The judges locked themselves into the officers as angry youths damaged furniture in the High Court building. Even in the late years of UNIP's 27-year rule, political party cadres were a menace, especially the youth wing known as vigilantes. It was partly because of the much-hated conduct of the vigilantes that UNIP was voted out of power in the 1991 elections. The elections brought popular trade unionist Frederick Chiluba and his movement for multi-party democracy MMD to power. During President Chiluba's reign, the thuggery of MMD party cadres reached its nastiest peak when he began scheming for a 3rd term in office as his constitutional 2-term rule was coming to an end. That was the time district commissioners could have the audacity to beat cabinet ministers who were opposed to President Chiluba's 3rd term bid. After mounting opposition within and outside the MMD, Mr. Chiluba shelved his ambitions and gave way to his former Vice President Levi Mwanawasa to run for the presidency in 2001. 20 years later, history was repeating itself. It was now President Edgar Lungu's turn to push for an unconstitutional 3rd term of office.
Until I hand over to the next president, who will be me in the next, because we are winning.
Mr. Lungu had held office from January 2015 to August 2016 and was then in his 2nd and last term that had begun in September 2016. It was during Mr. Lungu's rule of 6 years and 7 months that lawlessness occasioned by PF cadres reached a tipping point. Never before had political party cadres taken over the running of the country as did happen during Mr. Lungu's leadership. Even the Zambia police, which is supposed to operate independently, was receiving orders from politicians about whom to arrest. This was a total departure from the advice the then Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet, Leslie Mbula, had given the Zambia police in April 1995. At a 2-week police training workshop held in Lusaka, Mr. Mbula had told the Zambia police to start ignoring orders from politicians and top government officials about whom to and not to arrest. As reported in the 11th April 1995 edition of the Zambia Daily Mail, Mr. Mbula said professionalism was what would earn the Zambia police the respect of the Zambian people. He noted that some leaders had a tendency of instructing the police to arrest certain individuals, which should not be the case. Mr. Mbula emphasized that giving instructions to the Inspector General of Police was unprofessional. Mr. Mbula, who later became Secretary to the Cabinet, had given this piece of advice on 10th April 1995. About 20 years later, Mr. Mbula's advice had fallen on deaf ears. Not only were party cadres intimidating the police, they had also taken control of the civil service. If not, how could PF cadres harass a civil servant at the Ministry of Works and Supply and drag her to the office of Permanent Secretary Lennox Kalonde?
Yes, who is against the government of the day? I'm not taking it. So what you are going to do, don't step into that office. Don't we the youths of this nation want her. We are here. We don't want her to do that office. Question that office. Frustrating the government.
Mr. Kalonde could only watch helplessly. If not true that PF cadres had taken control of the country, how could PF cadre Kennedy Kamba summon the Lusaka town clerk and 2 of his directors for a meeting at the PF Secretariat? As PF Lusaka Province Chairman, Kamba had no legal mandate to summon the 3 officials when he did not serve in government at any level. That was the level to which the PF regime had destroyed what was previously a professional civil service. Elsewhere, PF cadres were abusing state resources by flying all over Zambia on Zambia Air Force aircraft distributing so-called presidential empowerment funds. As such blatant abuse of state resources was taking place, health facilities were running without essential medicines and people were dying, while others were taking expired drugs which were supplied dubiously. Caderism had become just too entrenched. Not only that, government contracts were being awarded to PF cadres, many of whom had no previous experience in the works or services they were carrying out. The result was poor workmanship or substandard services. PF cadres had become rich overnight and could be seen openly displaying their loot as many Zambians went without decent meals. In bus stations and markets, PF cadres had taken charge. They were illegally collecting millions of kwacha in levies while council workers went for months without salaries. It would not be an exaggeration to imagine that children had begun admiring becoming cadres instead of getting educated. Being a cadre meant free money. PF cadres had become untouchable. In the Eastern Province, PF cadres could even attack journalists from the Post newspaper and urinate in his mouth. In Kaoma, Western Province, a PF cadre who shot and killed a Upnd member during the Kaoma Council chairperson by-election could not be arrested then despite being well known. In Luanshya, during the Ron parliamentary by-election held in April 2019, National Democratic Congress Lusaka Province Youth Chairman Obed Kasongo was brutally assaulted by PF cadres. Mr. Kasongo later died in Lusaka. On 12 March 2016, during Youth Day commemorations at the Freedom Statue in Lusaka, unruly PF cadres stripped a woman naked for simply wearing a UPND attire. This happened in the presence of Vice President Inongewina, who was officiating at the event. What could the police do? They could only watch. Elsewhere, violent PF cadres kept on assaulting a female vendor, Messi Changwe, for displaying UPND regalia at her roadside stall in Woodlands, Lusaka. In Lusaka, a PF cadre even had the courage to storm the Lusaka Central Police Station and harass police officers. That was the level of lawlessness that had taken root in the country. This kind of PF hooliganism had emerged as soon as the PF won the 2011 general elections, beating the MMD. Hours after Mr. Michael Sata and the PF had been declared victorious on Thursday, 23 September 2011, PF cadres in Chipata district of the Eastern Province attacked MMD members William Banda and Dauzeni Tembo at a lodge. The PF cadres beat Mr. Banda and Mr. Tembo and stole money from them. The PF, they then handcuffed and drove them back to Lusaka. The PF cadres had taken over the role of the Zambia police. In later years, it would get even worse. PF cadres could slap policemen in broad daylight and go unpunished.
Honestly, this person is saying that you
The PF had become the law unto itself. Even High Court judges could not be allowed the latitude to discharge their functions independently. On 10th March 2015, President Edgar Lungu suspended Director of Public Prosecutions Mutembo Nchito and appointed a tribunal to probe him. Mr. Nchito went to the Lusaka High Court to apply for judicial review, and Judge Mwila Chitabo stayed his suspension. The following day, PF cadres, led by Secretary General Davis Chama, issued threats on Judge Chitabo for granting Mr. Nchito a stay. Within 24 hours, Judge Chitabo was forced to vacate his earlier decision. That was how the PF had destroyed the independence of the judiciary. Zambians could not even be given the space to express displeasure against some of the decisions made by the Zambian government. Opposition leader Sean Tembo of the Patriots for Economic Progress experienced the wrath of the PF violence when he and his party members attempted to protest against the exorbitant purchase of 42 fire trucks at $1 million each. As Mr. Tembo and his followers staged the protest on Cairo Road in Lusaka on 28 November 2019, they were attacked by PF cadres who assaulted them and stole various items. Mr. Tembo and his members sustained injuries and had to be rushed to the University Teaching Hospital for treatment. Policemen who dared to put violent PF cadres in their place were dismissed. A case in point is the events that took place during the Sisheke parliamentary by-election in February 2019 in the Western Province. For simply bringing gun-toting and machete-wielding PF cadres under control, Sisheke District Police Officer Commanding Shapa Wakunguma and 3 other officers were fired. The firing was called retirement in national interest. It was a dismissal, nevertheless. That was shortly after PF parliamentary candidate Dean Masule had lost to UPND's Romeo Kangombe in the 13th February 2019 parliamentary by-election. The PF cadres had become too powerful and could openly brandish guns while dressed in military attire. When the PF were not harassing opposition opponents and ordinary Zambians, they were fighting among themselves. At some point, rival PF factions fought in full view of President Lungu during a Labor Day commemoration at the Freedom Statue in Lusaka. It was not the first time the Zambian people were witnessing PF intra-party violence. Let us go back to December 2014. Following the death of President Michael Sata on 28 October 2014 in London, 2 rival factions emerged in the PF. One was led by PF Secretary General Edgar Lungu, who also doubled as Minister of Justice and Minister of Defense. The other one was under Matero Member of Parliament Mao Sampa. Both Mr. Sampa and Mr. Lungu had been elected PF presidents at two separate elective general conferences. The general conferences were held at the Mulungushi University in Kabwe. On the afternoon of 2nd December 2014, machete-wielding supporters of the Lungu and Sampa factions clashed in the Lusaka Central Business District, forcing shops to close as members of the general public watched in disbelief. 7 years later, the venue of the intra-party violence would shift to the PF Secretariat itself in Lusaka. On 1st May 2021, the PF was welcoming back its former member, Chishimba Kambwili. Prior to this day, Mr. Kambwili had been a fierce critic of President Lungu as he led the National Democratic Congress.
You know, I can tell you, Lungu, pampu miamu mtu, tapemankalamu, so I cannot be scared of you. Nabantu baku scared na wabara moneki. Kamu tutakwati mnangua kaputa na umwela kuchikawa. Nabantu baku china. Excuse me. So if you think you can take me on, I'm ready for you. Punch for punch.
As PF Secretary General Davis Mwela and other officials prepared to welcome Mr. Kambwili, violence broke out between two rival PF supporters. In the process, PF cadre Innocent Kalimanshi, who called himself PF National Commander, was severely beaten and injured. Also caught up in this violence was a police officer who was injured while a police vehicle was smashed. Caderism had become the order of the day, and the patience of the Zambian people had been pushed to the limit. It had actually been institutionalized. Under the PF constitution, one first had to be a PF cadre before being considered to head a state-owned enterprise or similar organization. Article 3 of the PF constitution states as follows, I quote, "The party shall ensure that all the public institutions, state-owned enterprises, and popular mass and similar organizations are led by persons who are members of the party and who are uncompromisingly committed to achievements of the party." End of quote. That was how important PF cadres were. Caderism had permeated the entire fabric of public life, from top positions in state-owned enterprises to the lowest cadre collecting levy from poor traders in markets and bus stations. Was there going to be an end to Caderism? The top PF leaders were advised to take control of their violent cadres or risk losing the August 2021 general elections. The advice seemed to fall on deaf ears. Media institutions which exposed the PF violence were labeled enemies of the state and banned from covering functions of the ruling party.
They can leave, don't mind. I run this institution, and when I make a decision, it's fine. You're not supposed to be here. When I do the press briefing, you're not supposed to come here. That's a decision I made. They don't cover us. Chap, you can leave. No. I've made a decision, they can leave. Chap.
Program. It's a paid for program. So what do you want, if I may ask?
Stop that program.
What? Okay, give us the money.
No problem about the money.
What authority do you have for you to...
This is a time of coronavirus. What? It's not the time to bring the opposition leaders to come and say something about the economy. There is time for them to come and talk about that. Not this time.
Who's doing campaigning here?
Oh, okay, what is he doing there? What is he doing there? Or what is he talking about?
Listen to him first. Listen to him first. And by the way, who gave you the permit to bunch into my office? Who gave you the permit to bunch into my office?
Later.
Who gave you the permit to punch into my office in the first place? This is trespassing if you don't know. This is trespassing. This is trespassing. Give me the permit. Who gave you the permit to punch into my office in the first place? That's something you should answer me. Who gave you the permit to come here? You pay the permit. Give me the permit. If you're not going to produce the permit, then I'm not going to cancel this program. Give me the permit. Who gave you the mandate to come into my office? The time that we hosted PF officials who did that. Why did you go there? Bring the man.
GBM was already yesterday.
Yes, GBM was there. The same radio. Please, I don't need your money. I just want to do my program. No, I don't get instruction from anyone. I don't get instruction from anyone.
This is time to talk about COVID-19.
Listen to me. No. You are not going to intimidate me. You are not going to intimidate me.
All right.
Yes. So do whatever. If you want me to.
This time we have just come to your office. This time we have just.
Give me the phone to whosoever sent you. Give me the phone. I talk to the whosoever sent you.
We are not going to come in.
Give me the phone. I talk to whosoever sent you. I talk to him. Give me the phone. Give me the phone. I talk to. Give me the phone. I talk to whosoever sent you. Give me the phone. Let me talk to whosoever sent you.
Just come out and see what is happening.
Bring. Just bring.
Just come.
I'm busy. I cannot leave this seat. This is where I'm feeding my family from.
Perhaps the PF leaders were too confident of winning the 2021 general elections to bother about stopping the violence of their cadres.
I can assure you, 2021 August, I will come here and say, Banyala. That's how confident we are.
On 12 August 2021, Zambia held its general elections, and the Zambian people decided to show their displeasure against the PF through the ballot. Contrary to the then Justice Minister, given Lubinda's show of confidence, it was Mr. Hakainde Hichilema and the United Party for National Development who emerged victorious. In post-victory excitement, some UPND supporters began destroying property belonging to PF members who had been violent against them. But President-elect Hichilema had come with a new tone. He said despite the UPND supporters having suffered the brutality of the violent PF government, they now needed to prove that they were different from their predecessors. That was how the president-elect saved the PF members from possible attacks by cadres of the UPND who had, for years, endured the brutality of the PF. President Hichilema repeated his dislike for Caderism in his inaugural speech as Zambian president at Hero Stadium in Lusaka.
We will restore the rule of law, general order in our public places and communities, and return our country back to normalcy. Read my lips, no Caderism from any political party. There is room, there is space for all of you, but there is no space for thuggery, there is no place for violence in the new dawn country of Zambia going forward.
Even the top leadership of the ruling party, the UPND, can openly discourage their members from engaging in violent activities. This is the new order that has returned to Zambia, following Mr. Hichilema's commitment to ending Caderism. President Hichilema's stance on Caderism resonates with what the founder of the UPND, Anderson Kambera Mazoka, stood for.
This Caderism, I call it Caderism, where it is the cadres that must be given position. That is not our password. No. We want to appoint Zambians who are capable. Look, Zambia has gone down. so badly that we will need every capable Zambian we can lay our hands on to deliver. We have to select people who can make a difference. Caderism is not necessarily the best thing for national development. It's good for the party support, but there's another way you can look after those who have managed your party. You should not injure or undermine the national development under the principle of Caderism.
Today, the Zambian people can sigh with relief that Caderism has gone with the PF, who the Zambian people rejected in the August 2021 elections. Now that the parties say they are rebranding, there could still be hope that they will discard the violence they were associated with. If the PF do manage to rebrand, it will be good for Zambia's democracy, because the ruling Upnd needs checks and balances from strong opposition political parties. But the biggest question is, can the PF rebrand and become a non-violent political party? Only time will tell. Never again should Caderism be allowed to rear its ugly head in public places, which are meant for all Zambians, regardless of political affiliation.